Order. Good afternoon and welcome to the Women and Equalities Select Committee. Today we are looking at gendered Islamophobia, and it's a one-off session examining issues around gendered Islamophobia. The session aims to understand the specific challenges facing Muslim women in the UK today, looking at barriers facing women reporting Islamophobia, how gendered Islamophobia impacts women and girls in the areas of sport, education and employment, and everything else. So thank you so much to the panel for joining us. We have Baroness Shaista Gohir from Muslim Women's Network in the UK. We have Dr. Irene Zempi, hello, down the line, Associate Professor in Criminology from Nottingham, Trent University. We have Raheel Mohammed, the Director of Maslaah, and we also have Allia Fredericks here from Muslim Girls Fence Coordinator. Welcome to you all and thank you so much for joining this inquiry with us. So I'm going to start off with the first one, Baroness. Statistics show that Muslim women are more likely to be victims of Islamophobia, abuse and violence than men. Is that your organisation's experience? And if so, what do you think are the main drivers behind it?
So yes, it is our organisation's experience. Now, I think the problem is the statistics aren't fully there because most women don't report. So I published a report, I can leave you a copy of it later, Anti-Muslim Hate in September, and 80% of Muslim women don't report. So we then started to look at the police data using FOI, and where the highest numbers are the Met Police, Greater Manchester, West Midlands, but that's probably where the largest Muslim populations are. But then we started to drill down and look at the gender, and so, for example, in Greater Manchester, it was more men reporting there and less women, which may be that shows that they're underreporting. For West Midlands, it was a little bit different. It was more or less 50-50, but slightly more women reporting. So I don't know whether West Midlands are better at trying to giving the women the confidence to report. And then the drivers are, where do I start? It's political. There's been a lot of negative political rhetoric. I think particularly some politicians in the last government, online social media spaces, public commentators, I think media as well, pushing a very anti-Muslim rhetoric. And sometimes it's disguised as free speech. And Muslim women are very visible, particularly if they wear their headscarf, if they wear their face veil, or you might not wear a headscarf, but you may have a traditional dress, and you're being, I think they're more easily targeted. Perhaps there's an association, they're oppressed, they're not going to fight back, they're with children, so they're an easy target, really. I think the concern is that it's not just in the street. It's in the streets a lot, but in public spaces, but also the drive-by. Not a lot of people are talking about when they're getting abused by drive-by. And I'd like it to be defined as gender-based violence. It hasn't been, because if you look at the stats again, the vast majority of the perpetrators tend to be male, white male. So I do think more women have started to obviously be perpetrators as well. So I think it's important to recognise it as violence against women and girls. And I think, and it's good, I mean, I'm not going to read all the stats in here, but 1 in 5 Muslim women, when we did the survey, are saying that they had experienced hate crime, and it might not be, it could be a non-hate crime incident because it might not meet the threshold. 1 in 5 saying they experienced it the last 12 months. A quarter again are saying that they've experienced it multiple number of times as well. So I think, and then that feeds into, and I'm sure you might ask about it later, that people don't live in a vacuum. If they're hearing rhetoric online, it feeds into when you're accessing a service. It feeds into the workplace as well, and the impacts are huge.
Absolutely. I just wanted to come back on 2 areas that you talked about there and you touched on. The first one is how police are recording this. So where you actually do have information such as the West Midlands Police and Metropolitan Police, how are they classifying Islamophobic hate or anti-Muslim hatred and abuse? And the second one is there a need for a definition so that organisations and services and the public sector can actually better quantify this data and any of the data that they capture? And I do have a follow-on from that.
Okay, yeah. I'll deal with them too. I might need a reminder. So when somebody is subjected to a hate crime incident, whether it meets the criminal threshold or not, the first thing is it needs to be reported. So the problem is it's not reported, so therefore you don't know how bad the environment is at the moment. So there's an educational piece that needs to be done. So when they do report it, then they might describe what's happened. They might assume that the police officer is recording it under faith hate crime, motivated by someone's religion. But the police officer, the way they interpret the law, and then we can talk about that, is they might record it under race instead. So if you look at the police stats, you'll see every year for each police force, it's several thousand is race-motivated hate crime, and the faith one is normally a few hundred and sometimes double digit. So then you don't know where the police officers put in that. So I think we need to educate women that if they believe, and it's their right to ask for this, by the way, even if the police officer disagrees, if they believe it's motivated by faith, they can say to the police officer that, can you record it in this way? But there's a lack of awareness, there's a lack of education, which means that the women don't ask, they just assume, and they might not know. What was the follow-up? It was definition.
It was about definition, so a standardised one.
So what would help is if we did have a legal definition, because at the moment you've got 4 pieces of legislation, and depending on what police force it is, depending on what the context is, depending on what the police officer it is, they might interpret that differently. So without a definition, because it's not legally defined what it might involve, they might classify it as that it's not a criminal offence, it doesn't meet the threshold, but the person may feel it does. That can also obviously apply in the workplace as well. So therefore you have this ambiguity, so you have inconsistent justice across different police forces and across different victims. And I know there may be some difficulties with legally defining it, but the amount of legislation that goes through this house, difficult legislation, I'm pretty sure we could define something that meets everybody's needs and concerns and actually protects Muslims from anti-Muslim hate. And one other point that really is an important point in terms of law, and this is, I did declare my interest as a board member of the Law Commission. So they published a report before my time. So they're saying we need to bring the 4 pieces of legislation together, as they've done in Scotland, make it really simple, make it really easy for police officers to then read that. Then you have the legal definition as well. And then on top of that, at the moment, race hate crime and religiously motivated hate crime are treated differently. So if something is a race hate crime and you see some online material at the moment, which is promoting hate but not threatening, that's an offence. But the bar for faith-based hate crime is lower, so which means you could have material online which is motivating hate. If it's not threatening, you can leave it on there because it's not threatening. So why doesn't the same apply for race and faith? It should be the same, because the end goal, you're actually harming people. It's resulting in hostility and violence. So what the Law Commission is saying, you need to change that so it's the same as race. So that's why online, by the way, there's lots of materials online that were left online after the riots, the racially and religiously aggravated riots that took place in the summer. There was lots of material that wasn't taken down because it doesn't meet that threatening threshold, even though it's inciting hatred. So that's where the law could be amended.
Thank you. Kirith wanted to come in on that point.
Yeah, it was actually in relation to the sort of stats you shared around reporting. So I just wanted to know from your sort of research, have you found a correlation between sort of representation of the local police force and the rates of women coming forward to report? Is there a link there that we could probably use?
So as I mentioned earlier, the Greater Manchester, West Midlands and London have the highest rates. That doesn't mean that there's more there, it's just there's a bigger Muslim population there. But it's interesting to see why more women are reporting in West Midlands compared to Manchester. Are they getting their awareness raising right? But another interesting stat I found, and this is just looking at, say, for the Met Police data, I started looking at ethnicity of the women that were reporting. Interestingly, more black women were reporting, more black women compared to black men were reporting, but when it came to Asians, more Asian men compared to Asian women were reporting. So I don't know why the disparity. So are black women more aware to report, or are they targeted more, or why are Asian women, less Asian women reporting? So somebody needs to really dig into the data. We don't have the capacity to do that.
Thank you. And just my last question before I move on to our colleague Alex. What are the most common forms of gendered Islamophobia experienced by women and girls? Are you seeing an increase on online Islamophobia? I've met with British Muslim TikTokers, women, that were subjected to awful Islamophobic abuse. A lot of them are in the beauty industry or in modest wear, fashion, all of those kind of trains of social media influence. And actually, they felt the onus was on them to police their own social media output as well, and what people were posting on there. And it did sound very much like the onus is still, even if a woman had the right to go in and say, I have been abused or victimised because of my religion, the onus is still on the fact that the woman should know that that's her right to do that, instead of, I think, perhaps the police offering and saying, you have been abused for X, Y and Z.
Yeah, I think when it comes to online, I think there's a big gap. Even when it's offline, women are not reporting. So when it's online, they're less likely to report. They just use the tools, and a lot of the times you get a message back saying, it does not meet our threshold. But it's different things. It's online abuse, so you find women either going offline or staying online, but not using exercise their rights to participate in speech online. It's also when you're walking down the road, your name called, being called a terrorist, your hijab being pulled, or what's underneath that hijab, or having food and drink thrown at you, or you're being spat at, for example. And it's really frightening if you're with a vulnerable adult, or disabled person, or a child. So women are changing their behaviours and not going to the park. After the riots, so women was doing online shopping. They're saying we're not using public transport. Some started to wear hats instead of headscarves. Some they'd go on a train without the headscarf and then put it back on, avoiding certain areas. That's their human right, and their freedom of movement is being restricted in that way, that you can't go down that road, or you're scared to do online shopping, or you're changing their appearance. As some women said, well, we didn't remove the headscarf, but we wore brighter and more flowery headscarves, or instead of wearing the jilbab, the long dress, wearing trousers, with a long top, that type of thing. So a changing appearance, but also behaviour. Because of the physical abuse, but sometimes it can be emails. Our charity rarely gets any kind of negative, surprisingly. I thought we're easy to find, but in the last few weeks, we've 3 weeks, we've had 4 saying Muslims should get out of the country. You're all rapists and all other awful stuff. So that's the problem. We're all being stereotyped. It's fine to highlight criminality. All Muslims are being stereotyped, which then is anti-Muslim prejudice.
I am so sorry that you and your team have experienced that. On behalf of the committee, that is just horrendous and completely unacceptable. Alex, I know you've got some questions for Irene.
Yeah, thank you. Irene, I wondered if you could tell me, are women from some Muslim communities more likely to experience Islamophobic abuse than others?
Yes. What I wanted to emphasize is that Islamophobia is intersectional. It's definitely gendered, but also we have added layers of identity. So in addition to religion, especially being visibly Muslim and also being female, there is that perception that because you are a Muslim woman, you are passive, you are an easy, weak target, and therefore you are more easily abused. So the offenders think that they can get away with it. But in addition to that, in addition to religion and gender, other added layers, for example, disability, age, race, sexual orientation, transgender identity come into play. So these aspects of identity are not independent. They create unique experiences of oppression, marginalization, discrimination, and hate crime for victims because they are seen as vulnerable in the eyes of the perpetrator. So the experiences of a Black Muslim woman are different to those of a white revert Muslim woman, for example. So we can't homogenize people's experiences. And in order to do justice and offer appropriate support, but also tackle the offending, we need to unpack these aspects of perceived difference and vulnerability. However, these experiences are so normalized that they become part and parcel of these women's experiences. And they think, what is the point of reporting that? They don't even know sometimes that that's a form of hate crime. And there are additional barriers, whether it's an insecure immigration status, whether it's accessibility issues, language barriers. So these are additional obstacles. So although in the eyes of the police, these could be single isolated incidents, for women's experiences, there is a continuity, whether it's online, offline, on public transport, using social media platforms. So it's very, very common to the point that it becomes part and parcel of being a Muslim at this point in time. So yes, to answer your question, it is gendered, but it is also intersectional. But that intersectionality is not understood by, in terms of the policing recording methods, and it's not captured both in terms of the different aspects of identity, but also that continuity that I mentioned. It's the police need single isolated incidents, so we miss that continuity of structural racism, historical oppression, marginalization, misogyny, disabling, and so forth. So depending upon the different aspects of identity that come into play.
Thank you. That's really interesting on the intersectionality aspect, and a little bit disheartening, but I'm not overly surprised. I just wanted to dig into that a little bit more around some other aspects. Do you find that, for example, there's a different picture in different parts of the UK, or that perhaps recently arrived migrants have more or less abuse than people who've been here longer? Are you seeing those kind of patterns?
Absolutely. So new migrant communities, maybe communities that are not established in this country yet, or also communities with illegal, insecure immigration status, they might feel less confident to share these experiences, even to their own community, let alone to the authorities. So in that respect, they might think, I deserve to be treated like that. As I mentioned before, they might not realize that this is a form of hate crime. And they think, that's how it should be treated. They think that it's because of their identity or identities that they are targeted, and that might affect their confidence to engage. So it might lead to self-censoring in terms of appearance, engagement. So it could lead to isolation and marginalization.
So are
because of
we
that lack of...
Sorry, I didn't mean to cut across you. Are we missing a piece of the picture then in terms of reporting statistics in newly arrived communities? Is there a gap in our evidence there?
We know that hate crime, so only 25% of hate crime is reported. And then you have the additional barriers of, as I said before, communities that don't have that confidence or knowledge, such as new migrant communities, communities with insecure immigration status. So we don't know the extent of the problem. We don't know the nature of the problem. It's only the tip of the iceberg that we get through statistics. I think academic knowledge and research and work that is being done through organizations like MEND and Tell Mama try to fill that gap, but it's about reaching out to those communities that are isolated and their voices are not heard because of either structural barriers or because they don't feel confident or have the awareness that that's a form of hate crime and they need to report it, that support is available for them. So the picture is unclear. The answer is that we don't know. And that means that people are suffering in silence, and that has implications for perpetrators who get away with it.
Thank you, Irene, and thank you, Alex. Before we move on, I will point people to my register of interests. I'll move on to Kirith.
Thank you, Chair. I guess I wanted to ask, and we have touched on this already, but just from your perspectives, to what extent is the visibility of Muslim women a factor in their targeting? So, Raheel, if I may, I'll come to you first.
Yeah, and I might sort of also just refer to Allia as well. So I guess for us in terms of our work, Islamophobia is, as we're hearing right now, happens on an interpersonal level. So somebody having their hijab grabbed on the street. But in terms of a lot of our work also focuses on the structural Islamophobia that, as Irene has been saying, is also really invisibilised. So there isn't a way, so in our work in schools, for instance, and I can perhaps speak more to Muslim Girls' Fence, we hear constantly of young Muslim girls censoring themselves because they don't feel safe in schools, whether they wear the hijab or not. We know there was a report by the Social Mobility Commission in 2017 that showed that there's a deficit in terms of education, in higher education, but also even if you do well in education, you suffer in the labour market, and that is because of Islamophobia and racism. So I think those are two separate things, and I think the structural Islamophobia is something that won't be covered by hate crime, but for us it's about understanding that racisms they're not static, and the current moment right now we're dealing with a number of different currents. So we've had the racist riots over the summer. We've also got ongoing what many people are calling a genocide in Gaza that is affecting the communities that we work with. There are kind of longer historical sort of currents as well. So the war on terror that's been ongoing and has kind of really marked a generation of Muslims growing up since 2001. And actually, if you look at the prison statistics, which is really shocking, like the number of Muslims in the prison system has nearly tripled since 2001. That's an area where there isn't enough data. And it does affect Muslim women because although it's largely Muslim men in prison, they are the brothers, fathers, partners, sons of a woman, right? So there's that impact as well. Allia, I don't know if...
Thank you. Yeah. I guess in terms of the visibility, and I can only speak for I work with young people and I work with young Muslim girls every day across the country. And actually I ask them, what does gendered Islamophobia look like? And one of the first things they say across the country is, I'm perceived as a terrorist, I'm perceived as I'm oppressed, I'm perceived as I have no choice. And those are not things that are true. Once you also combine a 12-year-old saying that, plus the pressures of school, plus the pressures of growing up during COVID, plus the pressures of just being a young girl, I think that those are the things that they internalize as well. So when we're talking about hate crimes, when you're saying speaking up and feeling empowered to be able to speak up for themselves, there is also that which affects young people's mental health as well. And we know that there is a really big issue there, but also the self-censorship of a lot of young people who are afraid to also speak to mental health services, do not feel like they're the right ones. Sorry, do you want to?
Yeah, could I know you finish?
I don't know if I'm answering the question, but yeah, I guess it's in terms of that visibility of that pressure of a young person, And it's also the adultification of young people as well. Young Muslim girls and young Muslim boys as well are often adultified in school settings, whether that's because of policies like Prevent, or because they're perceived through a racial lens, or because of their choices of wearing a hijab. The amount of young people that start wearing hijab in secondary school and get told, why are you wearing that? Who's made you wear that?
Yeah.
Was that your choice? And for lots of people, the choice to wear something, to not wear something, is not interrogated in the same way and is not viewed as a threat or something to be surveilled.
Before you come in, Baroness, could I just ask, on the adultification of Muslim girls, could you just expand on that a bit more? Is that okay?
Yeah. So I think, adultism, it doesn't mean that I think that we should treat children in the same way we treat adults, but maybe as seeing as their opinions are valid and are the same as the needs of adults. So it's things like looking at them as you've made this choice to wear a hijab, but you don't, it's either you're seen as a threat, so it's when they're saying I'm a terrorist, it's because that's a threatening thing for you to make a change in your choice of clothing, or it's the same way, it's a very paternalistic way of being but there must be a reason, you haven't got the choice there. So I think it's as all women of all different faiths have to hold, is the nuances of the agencies of choice and choices we have with our bodies. But for young Muslim girls, there is very specific adultification of that as well. Then there's also questions in the summer if a child goes, the amount of children we know that have gone away to visit their home country, and then they're asked quite invasive questions, and it's in fairness through the form of safeguarding around things like FGM, and it's outright said that's the process of adultification of a child, to be asked specific things about the body. And I think it's more about, when we talk about safeguarding, when we talk about Islamophobia, is actually understanding young people and how to talk to them about complex things like their bodies or their choices. I hope, does that answer it?
That really helps, thank you.
Irene has a hand up.
And Irene has a hand up as well.
A really quick point. What I've noticed in recent years is, before it would be mostly Muslim women who wore the headscarf or the face veil that were worried about their safety. But what I've noticed is a shift in recent years, which was in our survey as well, is that now, even if you don't wear a headscarf and you're Muslim, you're now equally as worried. I think the anxiety is still greater for those who wear a headscarf, but now there's not that much difference in it. So, for example, before the riot, 17% were very worried about their safety. Yeah. After the riot, 74%, which includes hijab and non-hijab, are very worried about their safety. So something has shifted now, and I just wanted to highlight that.
That's huge. Did you say 17% to 74%?
Yeah, are very worried.
Very worried. Okay. I'm going to hand over to Irene, and then I'll hand back to Kirith, if that's okay.
A quick note to say that when we talk about visibility, it's not just the physical appearance, which is the most obvious. There are other ways to identify someone's perceived Muslimness, and this could be a Muslim sounding name. Also practicing Islam, for example, praying. So I just wanted to bring that to everyone's attention, that it's not only the physical appearance, but also other elements that could contribute to triggering hostility, prejudice, hate crime, and so forth.
Thank you, Irene. Kirith.
Thank you. I wanted to touch on some of the other impacts that gendered Islamophobia has on women and girls, and sort of your experiences on that. So we've mentioned a little bit about self-censoring. Are there any other impacts that gendered Islamophobia has on women and girls? And that's for anyone.
I don't mind going. So I noticed after lockdown, is one of the things that's said about Muslim women is they have poor health, particularly older women. So you started seeing them going, climbing and walking and cycling and getting out and about, and out and about walking, which is good for their mental health. And then suddenly, when the riots happened, it was like, we're not going to go out and do those things anymore, which is something that was really good for their mental health. So their rights, freedom of movement is being restricted. And that's also good for their mental health. So I think that's an impact that's overlooked. Also now, we've got a domestic abuse helpline. So because of that safety, that could be used as an excuse by men now to say, well, you better not go out, and use as coercive control because you're unsafe to go out. There's lots of worried, even now my children, they're in their 20s, and they ring me and text me, have you got from A to B? That never, They were, I don't wear a headscarf, but they really worried about me. I worried, a lot of what was coming up was a lot of people are worried about their elderly parents. If you don't live with your parents and they've gone down to the shop, people are worried about their parents. So I think the impact is mental impact. I think we think of the obvious things like mental, or you're not going to go out, or you're going to change your dress, but there's something other, more sinister things going on. So, and this is why we need to strengthen the code of practice for politicians, because politicians will say something and make accusations you're an extremist, and then that will result in, they'll hope that you're not going to do any kind of defamation claim because it's expensive. You get away with it. You damage that person's career, their livelihood, mental health. And then if they then do, and then they win the case, all it is a small apology. You get an undisclosed damages, but their life is ruined. And two recent examples is Baroness Jacqueline Foster, who accused the Oxford University student, the young lady, of being anti-Semitic, and then she had to apologise and give damages. You had a minister, cabinet minister, Michelle Donnellan, accused Professor Kate Sang of supporting Hamas, and again had to pay damages. So if people who are in power, in positions of responsibility, if they're going to do that, and then we don't hold them to account here with better codes of practice, it's a lot easier then to do it online. It's a lot easier for the media to do that. So I think the damages are far wide-reaching.
Okay, David, did you want to come in on that point?
Yes, if I may, it was a point, Baroness, that you made near the start of your input then, around, since the riots, a significant percentage more of women don't feel safe going out and doing their usual thing. Now, obviously, the riots were 6 months ago now. Is there a sense that that's starting to ease off, or is there a sense that it's still at that sort of level and perhaps could continue at that sort of level of people who are concerned about going out?
So I think before the riots, I think there's a concern because of the rhetoric that's online, the media and the politicians. But I think when the riots happened, that didn't happen in a vacuum. It was almost a drip effect. We could kind of see it, and then that happened. I don't think people are now thinking, no, we've got nothing to worry about 6 months on, because you only have to see what's happening online now with social media. For example, Elon Musk tweeting and then lots of people retweeting him. The fact that we recently have had these negative emails and we don't get those types of emails. Something is different. So I think we're going to have to see in the next 12 months or 2 years to see whether it eases off and perception changes and things change. It's too early.
Indeed. Thank you.
Thank you, Curious.
Thank you. Did anybody else have anything to add?
So
Irene,
sorry.
Raheel, did you want to come in?
Yeah.
And then Irene as well, and Allia.
Yeah, I mean, there was a recent report by Amnesty, and they conducted a survey with the National Association of Muslim Police Officers, and they found that 22% of their group had suffered Islamophobia in the police. And actually, two of the staff they spoke to, both had returned from Hajj, conducted pilgrimage, and the man had grown his beard and he was referred to Prevent for that reason. And there was a woman who, I think she'd actually converted recently, and so started wearing her hijab. And then she was spoken to about whether or not she was being radicalised, potentially. So there's a kind of, there's something around how those stereotypes then are linked to becoming a threat, whether it's a terrorist threat or an extremist threat. And religiosity, whether it could just be simply growing a beard, or there's a report by Warwick University which showed that people working in the NHS were referring colleagues to Prevent because they'd seen somebody booking tickets to go to Mecca. And it's how those things are aligning right now. So suddenly, your Muslimness isn't just... your Muslimness in of itself is seen as a threat. And so if you're a young person growing up and you're a young Muslim girl, you have to find ways to sometimes to protect yourself in places of safety like schools, to sort of censor yourself. But we know that will lead to a huge impact on your mental health. And the other thing I'd say about racisms, including Islamophobia, and academics like James Nasru, Michael Marmot, the UCL Institute of Health Equity have shown that racism leads to poor health, mental, physical, and will lead to premature death, ultimately. Yeah. So I think, that's the gravity of, for us when we're talking about Islamophobia. It's not, even though it's really traumatic to have violent verbal rhetoric directed at you, but there's a scar on the body and racism isn't time defined. It stays with you. It suddenly makes you very suspicious of what public institutions. I'm
just going to check, Allia, did you have something to add to this? You're okay.
I just wanted to add, you mentioned police officers, also doctors and solicitors. So you can have a copy of this. We've published the Muslim Women's Manifesto. Black, Asian, minority ethnic solicitors, doctors and police officers reported high rates to their professional bodies of having these grievances against them. And so it feeds into the workplace. So I think we always look at hate crime, but actually it's what's happening in the workplace is really concerning. And you might not have, it might be worse if you're wearing a headscarf or you've got a beard, but they know you're Muslim because of your name. And I think we need to look at more in terms of statistics. And I think with the NHS workers, it's not just your colleagues, actually your patients may not be. I mean, I've got friends who work in the NHS and they've been told, well, I don't want to be treated by you because you're a Muslim. And they're trying to help them and save their life. And they don't get the support, though. So what they say is we don't get the support on how to deal with that. And when we report it, we don't really get support from our seniors.
Did you see any implication in that workplace piece of work that you've done and the data that you've uncovered, that there are any trade unions working in this space in terms of Islamophobia and particularly for women workers?
I've not come across that. They may well be. It's just that I didn't come across. I recently had 2 online conversations with our members, and they were really worried about the work. They said it's more subtle. It's hate crime. It's easy. Someone's called you a terrorist or pulled your headscarf. It's very subtle. It's microaggressions. Really hard to challenge. And that's why a definition would help. Because if you had a definition, then you could have policies in the workplace, really clear policies. Then if someone doesn't act, you could then hold people to account. So I think that's on what they were. So I said, how can we help you, like as an organisation? And they said, what we would love is for someone to give us some capacity building coaching on how to have difficult and courageous conversations, because they said it's not always racism. They said sometimes it is, but other times we just think our colleagues just don't know what they said. They might have just said it and not realised the gravity of what they've said. But I feel bad because I like my colleague, but I felt uncomfortable, but I don't know how to have that difficult and courageous conversation. So I think that'd be great if the government or somebody could fund that kind of training. I think for women it'd be quite popular. I think for men as well, actually, not just women. I know this is just about women.
We've got a quick follow-up question from Christine, and then I'm going to hand back to Kerith. If we could move on to the next section of the questions that you've got as well, that would be great.
Thank you very much. Very, very briefly, I've been working for my own party on LGBT policy and discrimination. One of the things which came up and something you said struck a chord there, and it's about a generation now going into care or having social care at home are coming across discrimination again. And I wondered if that was something that you mentioned, people being worried about elderly parents and where they go. Are the elderly coming across Islamophobia, which is aimed directly at them through the healthcare or social?
Yes, so we are reporting, we are getting, even from my own family as well, when they've been in hospital, their treatment, because it can be, again, it's micro, it's not obvious, it can be the roughness in the way you're treated, in the tone, for example, and they said it never... And for example, if they're in their 70s and 80s and they've used the healthcare system for decades, they're noticing a shift. They're saying it never used to be like this. Yeah. So why are they saying that? It never used to be like this.
Thank you.
Thank you. Kerith.
Thank you. There are a couple of things I wanted to touch on. First, although it's not Islamophobia as such, but is there evidence in your experiences of Muslim women being harassed from within their own communities, for example, by not conforming to community norms?
Will I take that one? So I would say a lot of that is online. You can have it as well. It's I would say toxic masculinity. So you've got young men online think they're heroes, and they're sort of saying to women, you've not got a headscarf on. Even if they've got a headscarf on, they're being told, well, it's not put on, your ears are showing, your earrings are showing, you've got nail polish on, you've got lipstick on. So that is toxic masculinity. So I think if we do end up addressing that in schools, you can't have you need general training, but I think it has to be bespoke for different communities of how women experience that. So it's not just women who don't wear the headscarf, it's actually women who wear the headscarf are also being policed. And my daughter she's actually 22, and she's raised it with me recently, and she said, Mum, I'm going to try and do something. She's in her final year, so she's recently set up an Instagram page called Muzzbadi, Muzzbadie, and she said, I'm going to put lots of diverse Muslim women to challenge the stereotypes of what a Muslim woman looks like, not just to the mainstream public society, but to Muslims as well. Because Muslims also have a perception of what a Muslim woman looks like. And it's quite interesting what she's putting on there. I hope she grows it to challenge. I'm sure she'll probably get a hard time. So we need to do more of that challenging, I think, and support to do that.
I guess what you were saying earlier about this concept of like freedom of movement and freedom of movement, I think a beautiful thing a part of Muslim Girls Fence is, I'm going to take an example of someone called Binny. She wears niqab, and she's been running, which is the face veil, and she's been running Muslim Girls Fence in Birmingham in Ladywood for the past 2 years. In those sessions, there are people of all different faiths, of predominantly Muslim women, but she recognised that in her own community there were things that were being said that were potentially homophobic, that were potentially sexist, and she was like, actually, like, well, that's not the space that we want to be. If we're saying, because we always say we have a safe space, this is a space for us to learn, to share, and to grow with each other. And as a result, with her, we've worked with an LGBT fencing team in Birmingham. We are now like doing more community organising across that. And I think it's what you're saying of the Instagram, of the freedom of movement, is like, if we are afraid to build communities with each other, to learn from each other, to also make mistakes with each other, then it feels more different than, our own internalized like sexism or homophobia within our communities can become rampant. And particularly when we're talking about toxic masculinities, a lot of the young people we talk to are talking about like people on Instagram who are like claiming to be sheikhs or like positions of faith, who are actually exposing like quite a lot of like sexist and misogynistic views, but that is not what our faith is. And I think that that's a difficult thing when we have portrayals of the Muslim problem in the media. We also have a feeling of wanting to protect our community, but actually if we're more honest about what are the structures that we were talking about that exist for sexism to exist, then hopefully if the patriarchy exists for all of us, then we can actually undo that.
Raheel?
The only thing I was going to add with the example of Binny is that it's, with Muslim Girls Fence, there's this combination of physical exercise through fencing, there's a space for creativity, and there's also a space for being able to talk freely and safely. And it's that kind of unusual combination. And it's also led from the ground up as well. It's rooted and led by those women. And I think we need more of that.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you. The next question for me is just around the sort of variety of bans that we've been seeing across Europe and other nations around things like face coverings, for example. Do we know what effect this has had on women in those countries? And have bans on forms of dress in other countries affected how Muslim women feel here as well?
Well, first of all, Muslim women must have the right to dress as freely as men. which doesn't seem to be always happening. And I don't know why women's clothing are seen as a threat to the West. It baffles me. So women have this battle of sometimes, not all the time, occasionally being policed internally, and then you've got externally in society, and it's usually men, because even if you look at what's happening across Europe in terms of banning the veil or banning the headscarf, it's usually led by men. So it is sexist in nature. So women worry when something happens abroad. They worry what's going to happen in the UK, because the rhetoric is online, it's picked up by people here and then repeated, and then you can probably, I've not looked at the data, but you can probably see when something is talked about in France or in another European country, the impact that has here, to see, and again, whoever's got the resources to do a detailed study to see where the spikes are there. So, and again, we've started to see here as well, people started to say, oh, let's ban this, let's ban that. We never used to have that before, but we've started to get more and more of that. And of course, what we're worried about in the next 4.5 years, culture wars have started already until the next election, and it's particular politicians appealing to particular segments of the society to see who can outdo the other to be as anti-Muslim as possible. But then the consequences of that, who bears the brunt of that, is probably most likely, it'll be Muslim men as well, actually, but Muslim women, whether it's verbal abuse in the workplace or physical violence. So I worry in the next 4.5 years what's going to happen.
Thank you. I want to bring Irene into this, and then we're going to have to move on if that's okay. Irene.
Yes, so my research has examined this topic in the context of women in niqab, the full veil. And what the evidence shows is that it's a form of institutional gendered Islamophobia. So banning the veil is a form of oppressing women in the same way that you would force women to wear the veil. It's similar to that. And bans in countries like France, Belgium have implications in this country. We live in a globalized world. Events that happen locally, nationally, internationally affect people's lives here. So although it's not illegal, it's not a crime to wear the veil in this country, it is seen as deviant, it is seen as immoral. And that can lead to a spike, to an increase in hate crime targeted at Muslim women. So there are clear links between what is happening in other countries and this country, especially in the context of banning the veil.
Thank you very much, Irene, and thank you, Kirith. David.
Thank you, Chair. We've recently concluded an inquiry into non-consensual intimate image abuse, and during that we talked about the fact that sometimes there are non-consensual images that are not sexual but culturally inappropriate. So, for example, a woman not wearing a hijab and being photographed by somebody in a setting that she wouldn't normally be photographed in, not wearing her hijab. Maybe to you, Baroness, is this a concern?
It happens occasionally. I don't think it's a big phenomenon. We've had it on the helpline. So this young lady, she was in college, she had male friends, and there's a photograph of her. But the person that was blackmailing her with the photo was actually one of her female friends.
Wow.
To say, I'm going to share this to your parents to try and get her into trouble. Now, the police didn't take it seriously because they said it wasn't intimate image abuse. But what the police didn't join the dots to think, well, actually, what this young lady was doing, her alleged friend, was inciting honour-based abuse, really, on that girl. So we then had to explain to the police officer, it's harassment, but it's inciting. So I don't know if it's in law something that you're inciting honour-based abuse. Maybe the law needs to be strengthened, or maybe it's there, but guidelines need to be strengthened. Then they warned the girl, and then she stopped doing it. So it's a problem, but I would say it's, I think to put that into law would be hard. But I think we could just have some better guidelines and training for police officers that what the impact for that girl could be.
Thank you very much. Irene, do you have views on this?
Yes, so as far as I know, non-consensual but legal intimate images are protected under the Online Safety Act 2023. So it's protected in terms of the legal framework. However, I don't know if people necessarily know so that they can report it to the police. So they might be so scared even to share that information with their family that, again, they might think, I shouldn't speak to anyone about that. And this could have harmful implications for their mental health, physical health, and so forth. But yeah, to answer that question, it is in legislation, as far as I know.
Okay, thank you very much. Raheel, maybe if I can come to you. Just looking at Muslim boys' behaviour, just in relation to this whole area of cultural image abuse online and general image abuse online, do you think there's a piece of work that needs to be done directed at Muslim boys, and how could that be handled, I guess?
I mean, I guess there's something about misogyny being a problem for everyone, and I don't think it's necessarily more prevalent in one community or another based on culture or religion. I think misogyny expresses itself in all walks of life. I think there is something about the role that schools can play in education in terms of misogyny, but also it's intersecting with racism as well. And that does need training for teachers, but it also needs schools to be a safe space to have those conversations as well. And I think we know some organisations who are doing that work, and it's hard work, and it takes a number of years to be able to have those conversations and to maybe change behaviour and the way that young boys and men think. But it's also, they're not separate from wider society. So if we're if we have people in power who find it easy to abuse women and Muslim women, then that's going to be copied, right? Like, if you have a politician that says something, why would you not then think it's okay to do that as well? So there's something around, I guess there's something about where does the blame lie? And I don't think it's I think it's about that kind of wide societal issues, but I think it's also about how do you practically create resources for schools to start that work, and community spaces as well. And as like Allia was talking about, the space that Binny's created, that's the kind of space where you could also have those conversations, and it would be fine.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, David. The government have talked about creating a boys and men's ambassador. How do you think that role could possibly feature as a positive in tackling gendered Islamophobia? Irene, you're nodding. Is there anything you wanted to add to that?
Well, in terms of my work on misogyny, I think not just about gendered Islamophobia, we need boys and men to be part of the solution. Often we focus on victims to have the confidence to report their experiences, to protect themselves, to stay safe, and we don't focus enough on how we can use education to raise awareness amongst those communities, those groups that actually are more likely to be the perpetrators, whether as direct offenders or witnesses of that behavior, and supporting those attitudes. So whether it's in school, higher education, employment, we need to bring boys and men into driving those solutions and driving change.
Thank you, Irene. Christine.
Thank you very much. I wonder if I could ask you, first of all, Irene, there are mixed views on whether there should be a formal definition of Islamophobia. I wonder, what's your own view on that?
So it is controversial, but just to give it a bit of context, it's been about now 30 years since the first attempt by the Runnymede Trust to define Islamophobia, and still, after almost 3 decades, we don't have an agreed published definition. So in 2017, the Runnymede Trust revisited the definition, and in 2018, we had the APPG inquiry, and the definition was offered as Islamophobia is rooted in racism. It is a type of racism that targets expressions of Muslimness or perceived Muslimness. So although I appreciate that that definition is not universally accepted, unless we define Islamophobia, it means that there is no mechanism for accountability. Now, what is being argued is that it can prevent and discourage criticism of Islam, free speech. However, I think that this is irrelevant to the question of whether Muslims in this country and elsewhere face discrimination, face hate crime, and how we can tackle this. The definition offered by the APPG can actually resolve the confusion that emerges from the term Islamophobia. So Islamophobia, in terms of the word phobia, suggests mental illness or fear, rather than picking out the discriminatory attitudes, hate crime. So the APPG, by clarifying what exactly it means, it helps to avoid that confusion. When it comes to criticism of Islam, Islam is a system of beliefs. It should be subject to criticism. I don't think anyone disagrees with that. As a clear consequence of free speech, Islam, as any religion and as any set of beliefs, should be criticized, as long as this is legitimate. And the intention is not to incite hatred and hostility towards a wider community. So I firmly believe that we need a definition, a statutory definition, and this can actually help with the confusion that exists around the term.
Would clarify everything.
I hope this answers your question.
It does, certainly. I also wondered what everyone else's view. Would everyone agree with that view?
So we do need a definition because at the moment it will help when police are dealing with hate crime. As I mentioned before, if you're an employee and you're bringing a claim, you can have clear policies. I think what it will do, it was a definition, whatever the definition is, whatever you want to call it, it will provide clarity of what is included, what's not included. And that's what everyone's arguing about right at the moment. So that's why we need a definition. Otherwise, by not having a definition, we've seen what's happened. Yeah. Anti-Muslim hate has just gone worse and worse and worse. If we don't have a definition, it will just get worse until people start getting killed. It will just get really bad. So I think we need a definition, and then we can debate the ins and outs of a definition. And obviously Irene's mentioned the APP definition. There's the Runnymede definition. There's the one I think you did, the UN that use as well. Maybe it's time we put them all in a hat and talk through them again one more time before we have a definition, to make sure that you allow free speech. It might hurt me to see my religion critiqued, but usually the examples that are given are the types of examples that I'm challenging myself as a Muslim feminist. They usually pick quite fringe interpretations, and then they say that's everybody thinks like that. We will have to challenge that. But I think what we need to do is protect Muslims. We can't, every day that goes by that we're not protecting Muslims from anti-Muslim hate and discrimination and prejudice, whether it's using a service in the workplace, out on the road, online, more harm is being caused.
On that note, it's already an offence to target a person on the grounds of their religion or race. But would I be right in interpreting that having a definition would help the police or the Crown Prosecution Service very much?
Yeah, so when they get that, they don't have a clear definition. So there is subjective. So what one police force might do, a different police officers in the same police force, and when they're being told what's the story's being relayed to them by the victim, they might interpret it differently. When you have a definition, it's really clear, set in stone. And I think Muslims are not asking for a special treatment, we're just asking for the same treatment, because if you look at faith-based hate crime, the Jewish community and Muslim community have the worst hate crime towards them. The Jewish community have a legal definition, so why can't we also have a definition? It will protect people. If we're about protecting people, forget about whether you're anti-religion, pro-religion. It's about protecting people. We've got great legal minds in the building and some great definitions. I'm sure we can come up with something.
You wanted to add?
Yeah, I think a definition would help to focus minds, that there is a specific form of racism. I think where it will become trickier, and this will be, and if there is a definition, it's about the implementation of this, which would be. So, for instance, we think that the prevent policy is Islamophobic, and there's been a whole coalition of different organisations, including Amnesty and Liberty, who have come together to write reports on that. How a definition like that is then used to scrutinise policies like that will be, I think, a useful question. But also in terms of what happens in terms of schools as well. So, if we know that in schools that there are moves to sort of have racism maybe created as part of safeguarding, there's campaigns to do that, to have a move to like a less Eurocentric curriculum, teachers being aware of the issues that young people bring into school. So for me, it's about that. How does a definition tackle that kind of structural issues rather than just the kind of individual prejudice against somebody on the streets?
Just add that Muslims are being racialised, and it's also cultural racism as well, because when you're walking down the road, you're looking for identity markers: headscarf, thobe, hat, beard. You're looking for something, aren't you? So people will say, oh, you can't do definition, Muslims are not race. Actually, they're being racialised, and there's so much evidence for that. So, yeah, I'm confident we can come up with something.
Baroness, you mentioned earlier on the Law Commission, and I wondered, should the government commit to introducing a hate crime act to bring all hate crime legislation together, as it has been in Scotland and has been recommended, as you said, by the Law Commission? How important would that be?
I would say that because I'm on the Law Commission board, but that was before my time. We want to make things simpler. In Parliament, we do this all the time. Sometimes when we've had legislation after legislation, we do sometimes bring them together under one act. We do it all the time. So it's time we did it now for this. There's 4 different acts. Scotland have did it, so maybe we can go and learn from them to see how it's working better. It will make it easier for police officers and the lay public. When I was trying to learn about it to write about it in the report, I got confused. So it's actually good for the public to know what the law clearly says, hold people to account when they're not applying the law as well.
There's been a lot of controversy in Scotland about the law, about how it's been framed. I just wondered if you felt that it would be useful. I can see Irene nodding her head. You've probably seen a lot about this. If there are lessons that we could learn in bringing the laws together for the rest of the UK from what's happened in Scotland. Irene.
Unfortunately, it hasn't resulted in an increase in reporting. So I don't know. And again, we need to identify what the issues are, what the barriers are. And it's not translated to the communities that need it the most. Why haven't we seen a rise in reporting? So for me, this is quite worrying. However, we can learn from Scotland, but I think what is important to emphasize is also the symbolic power of that act, and the message that we send to people and vulnerable communities is that we take it seriously and that we care. And that message is really important because it can make communities feel safer. It might not necessarily lead to a reduction in hate crime, but it does increase that sense of belonging that society and policymakers care for us. And I think it can lead to more preventative measures, whether it's, in terms of local organizations, national organizations. It can lead to preventative measures because there's more awareness and more emphasis, and maybe a bit more funding from the local government to invest in such initiatives. And hate crime is very much like a pyramid. Unless you challenge those microaggressions that seem really harmless, but actually they can cause so much harm. And those attitudes can escalate to more serious forms of harm leading up to genocide. Unless we challenge these behaviors at low level, so-called microaggressions, harmless banter, harmless jokes and attitudes at the pyramid, at the level of that base, then I think it can be quite difficult to tackle hate crime. So the symbolic aspect of what Scotland is doing with the Act is really, really important. However, I don't think that legislation and the weight of the criminal law can work on its own. We need open and public and respectful debate. But also we need better education to bring real change. So legislation cannot work on its own. When you have, whether it's politicians, social media platform owners promoting hate towards certain communities, it can't work. We need real change based on education and also accountability for those who incite that hostility and hatred towards the communities.
Thank you.
Thank you, Christine. Moving on nicely to reporting hate crime, Catherine.
Thank you. So we've touched on this already. I think under question 1 we talked a bit about reporting Islamophobia. I think we've talked about, people may be too scared, they don't trust the police, and there's no definition with 3 barriers to reporting that we've already discussed. But are there any others? And I'll start with Allia, please. Or if you don't want to answer, I can ask Raheel to go first, or Irene.
I think there's... it's really interesting. So that we've been having lots of conversations about the fact that there's been an increase in police in schools. And speaking to teachers, sorry, this is coming to the point that you're making.
Don't worry.
For a lot of the teachers in these schools, there's a sense of police means safety for those young people in schools. But with the young people that we speak to, especially from racialised communities, they don't see the police as being a safe presence in schools. And if you think about what's been happening recently, so we've had that horrific child Q case, and we then discovered that actually, I think the Children's Commissioner, there was a report that came out that said it was nearly 3,000 children had been strip searched by police. Half of them didn't have an appropriate adult present. Children as young as 8 had been strip searched. If you were black, you were 6 times more likely to be strip searched. And although it was predominantly black boys, those black boys also know black girls, and there have been some black girls who've been strip searched. So all of that context is really important when we talk about reporting and who we trust. I think for me, there's something about, instead of going down a punitive measure, if schools were spaces that felt safer and that young people could speak to their teachers about these issues, that I think would be a different way to tackle that issue, rather than being, let's bring in more police into schools, or just reporting to police.
I'll add to that. So in terms of schools, I think when you have anti-Muslim bullying in schools, it doesn't necessarily always be taken seriously. So I would like to see some stats around that. When bullying is reported in schools, if they can collect statistics on protected characteristic related bullying, so you have the data there for all types, of protected characteristics, or it could be general bullying, and then the schools publish that, then you can see if there's a problem, for example, with anti-Muslim prejudice in a particular school, that's not been dealt with. And in terms of reporting, as well as, women thinking I'm not going to be taken seriously. Some of it actually might be time poor. You've got caring responsibilities, and then you go there and you think, well, it's not, nothing's going to happen. I haven't got evidence. It was drive-by. But I think there's an educational piece around in the importance of reporting, because we need the data. But also there's a lack of trust. So in the report that I wrote, we were testing opinion, and 1/3 trusted the police. It was the same for the reporting hubs. I thought the reporting hubs would be more trusted, actually, but it was the same as the police. So what we need to do is now have a fresh look at how Muslims are reporting. You can't just have one organisation. Muslims are so diverse, across the country. So I think what you would need is several different hubs that feed into something centrally. And also, Muslim women will probably feel more comfortable reporting to maybe women's centres rather than a generic national organisation. So interestingly, our helpline is a domestic abuse, predominantly abuse helpline. Over the last 12 months, we've started to get calls from women, because we do say you can call us up about anything. In the last 12 months, probably had a couple of dozen cases now, some of it hate crime, but a lot of it is actually discrimination in the workplace or other kind of services. So we obviously say, go through the grievance process and, go through the complaints process. So now we actually we don't have the right metrics to report on our database. So now we're thinking, do we need to now develop a separate database, which is going to cost us money, but we're thinking about doing that, and then try and use volunteers to absorb the calls and then apply for some money. We've even started looking at, are there lawyers that can give pro bono help? So some of the cases that we are getting and these are professional women in, doing really well in their career, experiencing discrimination because of their faith, and not all wearing a headscarf, and then we're having to find discrimination law barristers. We've got discrimination law barrister trustee, Sophie Garner, on our board. She can't possibly take them all on. So we're now looking at, can we get some, sort of pro bono group of lawyers? So reporting is a problem.
Before we move on in terms of this set of questions, because the next set of questions is about education and schools. So if we could keep the hate crime reporting to other sectors, that would be really useful. Sorry, Catherine.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I was just going to come to Irene, but I was going to throw in my final question in this section to you, Irene, as well, so you can all kind of answer it together. I feel like the Baroness has already answered a bit of this question. But so what are the barriers, and then what are the challenges for the voluntary and statutory services supporting women and girls reporting hate crime?
Absolutely. Just to add to what has already been covered is that my concern in schools, but also organizations more generally, there is a mentality of no problem here. So they might be more reluctant to inform the police, and they try to resolve the issue internally. But in that case, often the victim is punished for the offender's behavior. So they try to resolve it internally, but I don't think this is really effective because of that mentality of no problem here. When it comes to reporting to the authorities, often there is a lack of empathy on the part of the police and authorities more generally. There is a lack of understanding. There is a lack of religious and cultural empathy and understanding and intelligence. And that can lead to, again, not feeling confident to report experiences in the future based on previous negative experiences by the police. So I think this is why third-party reporting organizations are really, really helpful in terms of bridging that gap between the authorities and those individuals or communities that don't feel the confidence or they don't feel safe to report their experiences to the authorities. And we know historically there has been a challenging relationship, for example, between the police and Black and Asian communities.
Thank you.
So that's in terms of organizations and the challenges they face, I think obviously funding is a key issue that many organizations struggle to secure year by year. But more generally, I think there is a lack of investment on training. So, for example, police training on hate crime is an online, an hour exercise, a tick box exercise, not involving real life experiences, not involving the communities that are the targets of this abuse. And often it's just about hate crime. It's not specific to Islamophobia or anti-Semitism or disableism, let alone the intersectionality of those types of hate crime. So the lack of adequate training, I think, is across the board. And other issues include, lack of, as I mentioned before, lack of awareness, lack of empathy, and these barriers might be even more obvious for new migrant communities that have already experienced challenges in terms of working with statutory organisations.
Thank you.
Some really, really quick points. Equality Advisory Support Service, which is if you've got discrimination in the workplace. So I asked a written question and I got a response to ask what percentage was faith-related inquiries. Only 2%. So it's on, if you go onto my name and you look at the answer. So G4S have got the contract. I don't know why they keep getting the contract. They should be evaluated because that is a really good place to go to get advice. So if they're not functioning properly and they're not reaching out to... So then I asked, what percentage were Muslim? Oh, we don't have that data. But if you don't have data, then you don't know if that service is delivering this. Well, they're not delivering the service because if you've not got the data out, the 2% Muslims are going to be a tiny proportion, and 1 in 3 ethnic minority population are Muslim. So they're not doing their job. So I think they need to be that contract needs to be reevaluated.
Thank you. Have you got anything else you want to add? Anyone else on hate crime reporting at all? No? Okay, I'll move on to Natalie, on to education. Thank you.
Thanks. So this is for Raheel. Is there evidence of girls self-centering or hiding their Muslim identity in schools?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I think Allia can speak more to this, but maybe you can speak about some of the detail. But it's just become normalised, and I think that's. And the concern that I have is that it's not normally picked up by a school either. And unless you create a space to have that conversation or to create a safe space for children and pupils so that they don't feel that there's a feeling of over-surveillance, which again comes through policies like Prevent. There's we've heard, we've spoken to teachers and we've spoken to young people, and the reasons why people might get referred to Prevent are things like drawing a gun in a notebook. Mm-hmm. And so when you're in a school where that's a possibility, you will censor yourself. And then you're also sort of seen, as Ali was saying before, you're seen as if you're seen as a terrorist threat or possibly an extremist because of what might be happening in the news, then you're also more likely to censor yourself as well. And I think that it's the repercussions of that I think are really harmful. So we've done a piece of work around, we've created a mental health resource that's come out from Muslim Girls Fence, partly because we didn't feel there was anything that was tailored to specifically meet those needs.
What about wider pupils? Is it fears of how wider pupils will respond, or is it just the wider school environment?
I guess it's a bit of both. So, according to Runnymede, 1 in 3 Muslim students experience Islamophobic abuse, and it's not clear if that's from teachers or from other pupils. So I think that there needs to be a bit of clarity there when you're saying about the data. Is how are we also reporting that? I think from the personal experiences of speaking to young people and to girls, it's mostly the thought of censoring themselves. When we're talking about, and you talked earlier about bans, there was literally a ban earlier this year with the Michaela School, and I've never worked with them, in which they banned congregated prayer, and that was held up. And I think that that's an example of when I was working in the schools of unprompted, children were asking me, are we not allowed to pray now in school? And that's not gendered, that's to do with the concepts which the young people were expressing to me of feeling when we're together, then that's seen as dangerous, or why is me praying the bad thing? It's not affecting my education. I'm doing it in the break, I'm not leaving class in the middle of class to pray. Mm-hmm. And I think it's those smaller things of do I feel safe? Do I feel happy to bring these different parts of myself in it. But then we can go to a school in which we've worked with Muslim Girls Fence for the past 4 years called Mulberry, which is great, in Tower Hamlets. And as part of their risk assessment and health and safety for PE, they weren't allowed to wear hijab during PE. And the girls were really upset about this. And then we were like, but have you ever spoken to like the SLT or anything like that about this? And they were like, no, but they'll obviously not listen to us. And why would they listen to us? And we were like, well, because you're very important, because you are part of the school, because the school is there for you. So they made a photo campaign of them fencing with their hijabs. They got all of these amazing Olympians who were wearing hijab, all of these historical people who wore hijab and have done sports. And all of these girls don't wear hijab, actually, so it's kind of a real mix of them. And then they presented it to SLT, they got teachers and students to sign it. And I think that that's an example of, like, the school then changed their school policy, of being like, if you're in a school environment in which your identity, but also not just your identity, but your voice, particularly as a young girl, is important and is valued, and you can see that you can make change, whether it's being in a room like this, being in an SLT room, being in all of those different things. And I think that that's, maybe I'm going on, but like it's the censorship. It's like, if we're allowed to think and to dream and to make change, then that's a great thing.
Thank you for that. Are there any other effects that you think this self-censoring has on young girls?
I think it has a massive toll on their mental health. I think there's a lot of pressure for whatever, if you're Muslim or not, to look a certain way, and regardless of your gender, but particularly for young girls. And that's often what they talk about, is the pressure of the internet, the pressure of social media, the pressure of, when you were talking about the Instagram people who also get loads of hate, like the amount of hate we get in our very neutral work. Instagram is terrifying. But we know, also working with like the Centre of Mental Health and the Wolf Institute, they put out in 2023 that Muslims face the greatest mental health inequalities and have significant barriers to support. So only 2.6% of Muslims referred to NHS talking therapies actually complete their treatment. And so I guess that statistic is to think about, what are the services that young people are being provided that are culturally competent, but also feel like in a safe space of them to be able to complete that. And if we don't have the literacy in our own, in like the older community around mental health, then how does that impact our young people today as well? And they might not, like one of the things, we made a video with young people about mental health in Tower Hamlet, and they're like, the best support you can get for mental health is other girls in Tower Hamlets. And that's great to get that support, but I never want it to be just that your peers are your support. Like, we want to have your teachers, we want to have all of the pastoral support in the school and wider, to feel like a place in which we can all get supported. So I think that like that internalized Islamophobia affects their attainment in school, but also their feelings about themselves, which is like their confidence.
I just want to give a quick example. We had a call from a girl doing GCSEs last year, and it was on her way to school, and from school she would get bullied because of her headscarf. So she then decided, she was so worried about her exams, but then she was also getting this from young lads. So she then removed her headscarf during her GCSE period, to then she knew she was going into the summer period, and then put that back on. So I just wanted to share that story. So that self-censoring can happen kind of also, you know, coming in and out of school. So there probably needs to be more support for girls to report bullying or abuse that they're facing to and from school. But also you could have it in very highly Muslim populated areas, and a girl might choose not to wear a headscarf, and she could be pressured to wear one, or teased and bullied, why you're not wearing one. So it kind of also can work the other way as well.
Yeah. Thank you. So there's currently no specific national policy for schools and colleges on preventing and tackling Islamophobia. How useful would it be to have one?
So one of the things that we've been doing is, as part of our Schools with Roots programme, so we work with schools to improve their relationship with communities, but that also involves teacher training. And so we've been running teacher training for nearly 2 years now at different universities. And part of that is around understanding what different racisms look like and how they might appear in the classroom, but also for teachers to understand their sort of power and positionality with communities who might feel, who might not feel they have the agency to challenge something that's happening in the school that they don't feel comfortable about. I think it's also just something that can be done through the curriculum as well. Like, the curriculum is really, the curriculum is Eurocentric, and I think what we find is that we're sort of trying to work on that. If social change is the line, we're trying to intervene really early as teachers are being trained, but we're also working in schools as well, because once teachers are in schools, it's, you know, they're really, really busy. But what teachers say to us that they need, and what we sort of try and provide, is a set of resources and training that they can run with on Monday morning. So I think there's a real plethora of like diversity education, diversity, equity, inclusion training at the moment, which doesn't necessarily give teachers the tools to do something on Monday morning. And so I think those interventions, really practical interventions, are necessary.
It has to come from the top, from the Education Secretary, because I remember over a year ago a message going from the Education Secretary to the schools, colleges and universities saying make sure that you tackle anti-Semitism robustly. In that same letter, she could have said also tackle Islamophobia, and instead at the bottom of the sheet it was just the number for Tal Mama, for example. So it has to come from the top. So you can have policies, but there seems to be a difference, and of course a policy would then help, a definition would help. That, you know, you could use a definition as a bit of a framework to help. I know that would be the legal definition, and also I think sometimes when bullying happens in schools, it probably does meet the legal threshold, but it's not reported to the police. So they definitely need some guidelines and policies.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Natalie. Samantha, moving on to employment.
This is to you, Baroness, first, if that's okay. What are the common misconceptions and prejudices that Muslim women face in the jobs market and the workplace?
I think we're worried about first getting a job. I mean, first of all, they have quite a high unemployment rate, but that is not all due to discrimination. It might be, you know, due to other factors like caring. But when they do return to the job market, or they are a graduate and trying to get a job, it's actually the interview process. It might be the name. I want to give an example of what one young lady shared with us recently. She was interning with us, and she said that she was trying to get internships and work experience at different law firms, and she wears a headscarf. But when she stylised her headscarf differently, she managed to get something. But when she took it off, it was more welcoming and more positive. She actually then managed to get some work experience, but she was experimenting of how she was treated differently depending on how she stylised it and if she took it off. Then in the workplace, women worry about career progression, training opportunities, promotion, pay. So one lady, she was actually in a law firm, said, I realised I was getting paid for the same job less, but she didn't want to complain because she'd rather just move to a different firm, because if she complained, then she said my career could be over, because, you know, people talk to each other and that would be the end of my career. So it's quite varied in terms of people's experience in the workplace. Now, they could go into a tribunal, but the problem at the moment is you've got to do the single. If you, as a Muslim woman, you might think I'm being discriminated against as a Muslim because of my faith, race, and being a woman, that intersecting identity. At the moment, as the law stands, you've got to do one case for your sex, one for your race, and one for your faith. You can do them at the same time, but what happens is when they do the comparator, on the sex part, they'll compare you to, say, a white woman. On the race part, they could compare you to, say, if I'm Asian, compare you to maybe, a black woman or an Asian woman of a different faith. And then on the faith part, they might compare your experience to a Muslim man. So in each of them, you could fail and they'll say, no, you're not been discriminated. But if you look at the intersecting identity of me being discriminated as a Muslim woman of colour, then you can then start seeing the discrimination. So I think the Labour government are thinking of changing that, which would be a good thing. Now, the other thing is whether this remains as it is or whether it gets changed. I hope it does. At the moment, my understanding is if you are found guilty on all three strands, the compensation is the same. Let's, for argument's sake, it's £1,000, and you get found guilty on, the employer gets found guilty on all three types of discrimination. It's just that my understanding is it's £1,000, even if it is for race and for faith and your gender. but it should be an uplift for each one. In my experience, it should be 1,000 for, sex discrimination, 1,000 for race, and 1,000 for faith. There should be an uplift. So maybe that could be included in any law. That would help Muslim women to bring. And on the Ministry of Justice, I was trying to do search. I think the search tool needs to be better as well, because you can search for tribunal cases.
Thank you. This is a question to Irene. What, if any, specific support do Muslim women need in the workplace, and how can employers provide this support?
I think there is this notion of Muslim penalty in the workplace, especially for Muslim women. So not just in terms of recruitment, but also, as we said before, accessing training, support, retention, progression, promotion. There is the Equality Act 2010, which is fit for purpose, but it's not necessarily the first port of call, but it's also difficult to access the legal system in discrimination cases. But I think in terms of putting in place mechanisms to prevent such discrimination from taking place, for example, in terms of recruitment, potentially name blind applications could help. Also, I would like to see analysis of annual recruitment intake to check Muslim numbers, but also I would also like to know the number of Muslim women and men in leadership positions in organizations. I think we find that at the top, there is a lack of diversity when it comes to the Muslim community. So even if they are part of an organization, they are less likely to be managers. Why is that the case? They don't have the education or the experience, or are they discriminated because of their religion, gender, and all the added layers that we mentioned before? I also think it's important to have like a workplace that accommodates religious and cultural needs. My research with, for example, Nottinghamshire Police about Black and Asian police officers or staff, it was evident those who identified as Muslim that their religious needs were not always met. So, for example, asking for annual leave during Ramadan and that not being accommodated, asking time for praying, and again not being accommodated. And some participants said, if I wanted to smoke, they would give me, a break. But when it comes to praying, I'm treated differently because of my religion. So I think it's important to provide and accommodate religious and cultural needs in terms of flexible working around Ramadan, making sure that there are prayer rooms that are appropriate for people to pray, and also being involved in Islamophobia Awareness Month, but also sponsoring such events around Islamophobia Awareness Month. And although it's not just in November, I think it's every day, every month. So it could be activities around that idea of raising awareness.
Thank you. As a Member of Parliament for a predominantly Caucasian constituency, apart from sort of closer to Derby City, which has various religious people that follow various different religions, predominantly from India and Pakistan. The rest of my constituency is very white, and so I'm frequently thinking to myself, how can I be more inclusive across the how can I sort of almost force that issue? So this is all really fascinating. Also, a campaign to get more girls and women into tech and STEM, STEM, and that is all women. So that is an additional consideration. Is race and religious beliefs. Yeah.
I'll add something quickly, and it could link to your STEM. So we know that Muslims, and particularly Muslim women, have high unemployment rates. The apprenticeships, the Muslims have the lowest uptake of apprenticeships, and it's for companies, it's tax efficient for them to have apprenticeships. So maybe we could push to try and get companies to get more Muslims, or maybe reach out to try to get more Muslim apprenticeships. It will obviously help with the economy and get them into employment, but also more in the workplace. And Irene mentioned Islamophobia Awareness Month. I'm launching something, because that's quite a negative framing in a way. You've got LGBT History Month, Black History Month, Women's History Month, you've got South Asian Heritage Month. So I'm launching in March. Don't really have any funding for it, but Muslim Heritage Month. So it's all about positive storytelling. So it's a way of tackling stereotypes, challenging discrimination, but in a positive way. So it's the ties that unite us, which is the commonalities that people have. It's the contribution of Muslims in British history, but now in every sector. And it's positive storytelling. So I've started reaching out to, TikTok, even X, by the way. They're responsive, actually. Various football clubs, Warner Brothers. I've gone across sector to mainstream. It can't be Muslims talking to each other. So I am having an event on the 11th of March, hosted by TikTok. I know although they're social media, there's people complain about them, but whether we like it or not, they also have a reach to influence people. So we'll have some TikTokers there. So if anyone would like to come, please let me know. It's a Ramadan event on the 11th of March. So just wanted to share that good practice.
Thank you. My last question for this section, aimed at you, actually, Raheel, you may want to feed in, Allia, and I think we probably started to seg with this, talking about the apprenticeships, but what work do you do to support Muslim girls leaving school and entering the workplace?
We haven't done anything specific, but I think it speaks to that question around, as a young person in school, what are you learning about how you can bring yourself into that space? If you feel that you have to kind of censor part of yourself or leave part of yourself at home, you'll take that into the labour market as well. I think the examples that Irene gave about, there is an onus on work of an employers providing nice spaces to be able to pray, and not a kind of like, we hear stories of like a stationery cupboard, and that's your place that you can go and pray, or not making enough flexibility around Ramadan, so you can work from home more. But I think there's something around, there's just something around how does a young person going through the school system, it feels like there's this, it's almost, there's an inevitability, right? Like if during school you're learning that your identity is something that you need to slightly hide, then you will take that into the workplace, and that's not going to benefit you. So I think there's something about just that kind of starting really early, I think, in school. I don't know if you wanted to add.
Yeah, I guess as part of our work is that we employ young people. So for us, that's a big part of everything that we do. So even us coming today, all of the notes I've written, I've worked with a young person and had a paid phone call with them in which they are consultants in all of the work that we do. All of the coaches, a lot of them are young people who came through doing the community sessions. They are now paid coaches, and lots of them get support financially and also support with all of the different things to set up their own community sessions as well. So I think for us it's a lot of being what are the resources that we have, and how then can we support them to do that? And I think it's no surprise, and I think this is not necessarily to do with gender Islamophobia, but we need more resources for young people, whether that's youth clubs, whether that's apprenticeships, and all of those spaces in which young people have the freedom to have the confidence to explore the workforce and employment, and that's kind of what we try and do.
Thank you.
Thank you. Can I just add one more thing? I think a really fundamental part of all of our work is that we work with communities, and they are part of making whatever we make. So whether that's our health resources or education. And in what Ali is talking about, there's something around, they're also learning a different set of skills. They're learning how to write stuff, how to create resources, how to be able to present to different people as well. I think there's something also about taking up space in the public space. So for the past few years, we've kind of regularly been at Eden Square in Trafalgar Square. We've had Muslim girls fence on, and people are fencing. But there's something around, we've had hundreds of people fence in Trafalgar Square, and it's amazing. So there's something really joyous about that. But those are also then open up opportunities to talk about what you're, other things like employment or like STEM or STEAM or
Thank you very much. Thank you. I'm going to move on to Rosie, who has some questions about sport.
Thank you, Chair. This section is probably mostly for Allia and Raheel, I guess, but anyone can kind of contribute. What are the barriers faced by Muslim women who want to participate in sport, would you say?
Yeah. Well, like almost a third of British Muslim women describe their current fitness activity as inactive. So that's like a bit of context. But 97% of people who responded to this Muslim Sports Association survey said they wanted to increase their participation in sports, yet 37% were not involved in any sport activity. So I think that's like gives us an indication that there is a want, but there's not necessarily, as you said, there are barriers that are in place. I think often we think about those barriers and they've been talked about in a way of being like it's assumptions about our lives or our interests, but actually it's things like barriers to access ranging from cost, times, locations, how the offer is marketed. And they don't affect Muslim women alone. I think there's lots of people of colour, non-Muslim women who might feel like the local gym isn't for them. So I think what we're trying to do is create spaces in which Muslim women are centred, but actually it's not just Muslim women who come to our spaces. We're not, and I think also talking about those assumptions that we're housebound, we're not allowed to go out to do sports. It's about what are the things, is it free, is it local, is it at a time of evening or day in which it's accessible in terms of childcare or in terms of my prayer, like to Maghrib, like in the evening. Is it like really basic stuff which actually in Doncaster, one of our coaches, Akila, she helped to set up like a Muslim women's swimming club after starting up fencing, and they were all like really panicked because they were like, there's these windows for the swimming pool, but we need them because it's like at the leisure centre, and then the parents like to watch the kids when they're playing, and we have not Muslim women, but women only things. And it was just like having a conversation with someone to be like, you know, you could just put some blinds in and actually it's like not going to change anything in terms of health and safety, and we'll pull them up when you don't need them. And I think it's just like ask a question, there's no wrong questions, and it's like if we just work together to make sure that all spaces and sports spaces and community spaces are more accessible, not just for Muslim women but for people of different access needs, of people of all different genders and different faiths. I think it's really, that's like a big part of it, is like thinking about that, about the appropriate facilities, family commitments and things like that. But yeah.
Brilliant, thank you. Raheel, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I mean, there's, you know, I just remember sort of speaking to a couple of pupils who were basically told, so Muslim girls, they wore the hijab, but there was an assumption made by the sports teacher that they wouldn't want to play football. And it's just, I think what's interesting about fencing is, and part of the reason when British fencing, when we started the work with British fencing, when you're fencing, everybody's wearing the same uniform. And that was something that kind of really, we thought this could be really interesting. And at that time, Mohammed, she was a black Muslim woman, wore the hijab, won bronze, I think, for the US Olympic team. But it's not that there isn't the sort of enthusiasm it's just that how people making that available, that opportunity.
Okay, brilliant, thank you. And we've got sort of all our paperwork, we've got some really good examples about Khadija Mella being a jockey. You know, it's not the sort of thing that you normally see in the media, is it? And women training as lifeguards, because all the lifeguards were usually traditionally men. So it seems like there is a bit of progress being made. But how do you think that we can ensure that the wider community or religious leaders are supportive of women's participation in sport, or is that not an issue, do you think?
I think that one of the things that we've done it in Leighton, we've done it in East London Mosque, and we've also done it in Bradford, is we've ran sessions in mosques. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's really important as well. It's like, well, bring it to the place. And then people are like, oh, that's actually really fun. Maybe I will go to the community centre now. Mm-hmm. Or even if it's just once a month that we go in, I think that that's like something in being like, that's a bit of community building, but also like learning from each other. And yeah, I think thinking about that in terms of, also as part of our religion, we have something called Sunnah sports. So that's like part of like what the sports that the Prophet, so it's like things like archery, horse riding, but also swords, so fencing, and so that actually sports is a big part of our faith. And so often we talk about it in terms of that, and also in terms of our well-being, a big part of, like, we pray 5 times a day, but also about like how do we look after our bodies, how do we look after our minds is a really big part of our faith as well. So we often talk about that. And when we talk about mental health in our communities, maybe we feel like there's, I don't know if you'd say more stigma, but that's, I think, a big way of which we talk about like mental health for some people in our community is through sports.
Thank you.
And just another kind of layer of our work is something that we call public imagination. So when we're doing all of this work on the ground, it's really important to sort of be able to show that publicly. So Muslim Girls Fence has been part of the This Girl Can campaign, and again, like, that visible representation is a really good counter to some of the negativity. And I think, wasn't she part of that photography
Yeah. She won the Portrait of Britain last year, one of our fences in Birmingham. So,
and again, it's like taking up public space. So it's taking up public space online, physically, like Eden Square. Like, I think that is a really important part of all the work that we do as well. But it's rooted in that practical stuff initially.
Thank you. Do either of the others want to come in?
Yeah, so, well, I think, first of all, I think schools, I think there's a stereotype around girls not, I mean, this applies probably all girls. There's probably least investment in girls' sports, and then there's probably hierarchy in terms of if you're a minority ethnic girl and Muslim girl. So I think that needs to be addressed, schools offering the sports in the first place. And then when you're talking about women now, so adults now, it could be they have the poorest, the census shows you they have the poorest health. So we tried to set up, you might want something gentle like a walking group. After COVID, you saw lots of women going hiking and cycling and swimming and all those things. That needs to be supported, particularly team sport, because people say to Muslims, oh, you're not integrated. Actually, sports and team sports, you're meeting people from diverse backgrounds. That's good for integration, community cohesion, but actually challenges stereotypes, good for challenging discrimination indirectly and softly. So we need to highlight good practice. So sometimes parents initially can be barriers themselves in schools, but actually maybe we need to get the parents out to do some of this stuff. And I think we need to highlight good practice. So there's lots of, I want to give you a couple of examples. The Crystal Palace for Life Foundation, the football club, they have charities. They've got the Get Involved programme. The England Cricket Board have got the Dream Big Desi Women programme. So one of the things that I've been trying to do is, because everyone loves football, lots of girls are getting into football, so each football team has a charity arm to it. So on the 5th of March at 2 p.m, we're holding an event with the following football charities: Crystal Palace, Arsenal, Leicester, Wolverhampton, Aston Villa, and the Premier League. They are going to highlight what they are doing in terms of to try to be more inclusive in their local communities, including with Muslim women and girls. So 5th of March, 2 p.m, if you'd like to come along, please let me know, and then you can then hear from them. I think what we need to do is create positive environments. We need to invest more in sports, make them accessible in terms of whether it's swimming or whether it's team sport. Now, I know there's been some debate in terms of sometimes, you know, when two sets of rights of two different groups clash, what do you do? So, for example, some women were concerned, for example, at school, if you're a Muslim girl and a trans boy is in the changing room or in the team, or if you're an adult, a trans woman, for example, what do you do then? Because you've got competing rights. That might then prevent her, for example, from participating. Then you've got to, you know, so obviously my beneficiaries are Muslim women. So I'd be looking at, well, if they're then not included, or they can't feel that they can be included, then they're missing out, I guess, on being integrated. So I think it's quite complicated. Swimming's another example, swimming classes. So I think you have to look at it from school all the way to whether women are doing it professional sports, whether it's for fitness, whether it's for leisure. You've just got to try and remove as many barriers to participation as possible. That's what I would say.
Thank you. So schools and organisations need to talk to those groups of women and understand.
Yeah, just to see what their needs are
issues,
and what needs to happen to remove it. I mean, you gave the example of the swimming and that, you know, you could see inside. I've noticed one of my local gyms that I go to, they've suddenly put, you know, something up so you can't look inside. So something can be really simple solutions, actually.
Okay, thank you. Did anyone else want to come in on that who hasn't? No.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I've got a quick question on sport, and it follows on from Shaista's brilliant examples there of what we do really well, and actually we don't champion enough and don't learn from best practice. So in Luton, I represent Luton North, there are some fantastic initiatives going on there, and particularly inside mosques. And if people have not been inside a mosque, they won't know that there are self-defense classes. There are often gyms. Yeah. There are a lot of women's exercise classes that happen and take place in those. And how we get that message out more. Active Luton also, they run so many women-only swimming sessions, and it is as simple as just picking up a blind. There is just this cheap blind in Lucy swimming pool that they just roll up and roll down. And sometimes it's down for a lot longer because everybody feels a bit more comfortable with not being watched. And they roll it up for the children's sessions instead. So I think that there is more that we could do to promote those best practice that I think that you've highlighted, and even down to really local, as it was highlighted there about the uniform that people wear. What would work best for a Muslim woman actually might work best for all women. Luton Women and Girls Cricket Club actually surveyed their team, of which it is hugely diverse. There's women wearing hijab, there's women wearing niqab, they all play. And they were all said, what colour do you want? And none of them wanted white. No woman wants to wear white playing any sport. And they wear this really cool black and gold. And they've kept that, and it's amazing. But it is just simple as asking what they want. So I wondered what we could do to better promote those examples of best practice and to exemplify them, really. Is there anything that we could do, Allia, do you think? And I'm just going to come to you on that one.
I think that's actually, like, I don't even live in Luton and I know how great it is, because I guess it's that word of mouth within our community. Like, I went to a scout session literally yesterday and they were talking about how great Luton was, the scouts and the Muslim scouts group. So I think that's within our own communities, we do a lot of like telling each other. But I think it's like speaking about them here and celebrating like places like Sisterhood FC, which is a all hijabi football team. But investing in them, and then also like when we got the opportunity to be on This Girl Can, which is like a national campaign, having that public imagination of putting people not just in Birmingham but across the country to see a person in niqab using like fencing, that's incredible. Or for everyone to hear about Luton's cricket club, I think it's like, how do we change the public imagination of what sports people look like? And I think actually during the Olympics that was an opportunity in which lots of people did talk about that, and I think Sports England are quite good at talking, and I think about and promoting what does it mean to be a person of all different faiths, of all different races and all different genders in sports, and how do we make them more inclusive?
Can I give one quick example? Muslim Heritage Month website, I've actually just set up a DEI good practice page.
Okay.
So I've added the Crystal Palace example on there and the cricket board example on there. And the idea is to put good practice, DEI good practice that companies can then highlight and boast about, what not just in sport, across anything that they're doing that's being inclusive to Muslims. So I'm hoping to populate that.
That would be brilliant, and I think if we can encourage people to share their examples of good practice, that would be great, because we can all learn from one another. The thing I wanted to ask is that there is a huge drop-off for all girls when they get to teenage years in participation in sport. Now, when I go to primary schools in Luton, all the girls and Muslim girls are so competitive, right? They all want to be footballers, they all want to be cricketers. There's a handful of them that want to play other kinds of sport. But when they get to their teenage years, they drop off. Are we seeing a bigger drop-off in Muslim girls? And what's the reason for that, do you think?
Yeah, according to Sports England's like active life surveys, the girls from minority backgrounds, including Muslim girls, have the lowest participation rates compared to their white counterparts. And I think we often talk about it in terms of, is there access to it? And actually, and this is like to do with, like in schools, they often don't always invest in girls' sports, in creative spaces for girls. And I think it's about investment in schools. And there's loads of great organisations like Girls Active and PE teachers. If we have more PE teachers who are also women, who are also encouraging these like unusual sports like fencing or archery and things, and if we have more funding in those kind of sports, but also sports spaces outside of the school. It might be also that they don't want to be at, like, there's a big drop-off rate for our clubs in the evenings during winter. There's obviously a reason why, because girls want to get home, everyone wants to get home before it starts, but specifically if you have worries about being a girl in the dark. Yeah. And it's about spaces like, where are the spaces which feel like brightly lit, safe, and for me to do sports. So if there were more youth clubs, then great, there'll be more access to sports.
Well, you could actually tell them the benefits of continuing. Apparently, research shows that if you do competitive sport when you're younger, particularly team sport, you're more likely to excel in leadership positions. Research apparently shows that. So if we highlight that to them, the benefits, it's not just the health and fitness, it will help your career.
That would really help, I think, sell it to parents to be supportive as well. Kirith, you had a question.
Yeah, just one final point, and can I just say thank you to you all as well, and Irene as well, for sharing your experiences and your data as well. It's really, really valuable. I just wanted to ask, so I attended an event last year for an organisation called the Women's Faith Forum, and at that event a colleague shared how some Sikh girls felt a bit too afraid to go into schools with their turbans following the race riots of the summer. So I wanted to know, are you also sort of collecting and getting data around other minority groups who might also be facing sort of a knock-on effect of the rise in Islamophobia, particularly following events of the summer? And also, from your experience, does it also have an effect on other communities?
The answer is yes. So even in this report, there was a small number who are participants who are not Muslim, and they said, well, it's impacting us because people think that we're Muslim. We had an online meeting in November, and there's this one lady, she goes on Christian, but she wears a headdress and traditional sort of African clothing. She goes, I get regularly mistaken for a Muslim, and yes, they get abuse as well. So it's actually, the people are looking at appearance. So, you know, whether it's Sikh or, you know, whether you're this African Christian lady, you're being racialized.
Irene has a hand up.
So actually the first victim of hate crime after the 9/11 terrorist attack was a Sikh man who was perceived to be Muslim. And I think, and I've done research with Professor Imran Awan on mistaken Muslimness. So especially men who are targeted for Islamophobia, but they are not real Muslims. So typically Sikh and Hindu men are targeted as perceived Muslims for Islamophobia because of mistaken identity. So we see that it has ripple effects not only for Muslims, real Muslims, but also those perceived Muslims, both men and women. That's why if we go back to the APPG definition on Islamophobia being a form of anti-Muslim racism in relation to perceived or real Muslimness. So that demonstrates the visibility of Islam, not only for real Muslims, but also those perceived to be Muslims.
Thank you. Does anyone else have any other questions at all for our panel? No.
Thank you for being a brilliant panel.
I
was scared, but you were not scary.
No, we have always worked as a committee that tries to get the most out so that we can have the best informed report. I've got two last questions before you say thank you and that we've all been kind.
Just might change your mind.
Just a quick one, and that's about the reporting hubs. And I know that we want them to be culturally sensitive reporting hubs, but there is communities within community. And I wondered how diverse and how localised you would expect or would think that a really effective local reporting hub would be. Should it be centred around the Muslim community that you have, that it was serving, or should you have more generic reporting hubs that are very culturally sensitive and aware generally? Which one do you think would be more effective?
That's a complicated question, because you could have something in the community but not very niche and small. It could be an organisation that it could be new or it could be an established one that has reach. So I think you need them in regionally, you know, one in Yorkshire, one in Greater Manchester, you know, where the largest Muslim communities are, potentially, one in West Midlands. I think also you need to look at women's centres. So now we're thinking as a national Muslim women's charity, we should probably have a national in tandem helpline, a separate one, because the data you collect is different. Because people naturally are coming to us anyway, they know about us, as an example. So I think you have to look at the credibility and the reach of the organisation, and are they going to that organisation. So for example, I don't know, Bangladeshis may not want to go to a Somali organisation in Somali, but you know, for example, I was speaking to somebody from Redbridge yesterday. She goes, the communities there are so diverse, but if you've got that one organisation, regardless of what ethnic background that organisation is from, but if they've got good relationship with the others, for example, that one could be it. Okay. So it probably needs a bit of a research, and I think the tendering process needs to be opened up. It can't just go to one organisation.
Okay, thank you. And then the last one is, we live in a globalised world. We're not immune to anything that happens outside, and actually vice versa. How do you think our standing in the world is affected by the level of Islamophobia and anti-Muslim hatred in this country? You know, close to my heart, a lot of my family live in Malaysia. My mum's from Malaysia, and when Malaysia issued a travel warning to the UK following the riots, it was quite a big deal. Are we in danger of missing out on really talented Muslim women coming to this country in sectors such as health, business, investment, education? Are we missing out potentially because of our reputation of not getting this right?
I mean, I think our reputation, I mean, I remember after the riots, I ended up doing lots of international media, which was unusual, but everybody was watching us. We've had UN committee reports on the rights of children that have been, and on racism, they've been highly critical of the way that Muslims are portrayed in the media, how the rights of children are affected by counter-terrorism policies like Prevent. Yeah, and for good reason. I mean, I think we should be ashamed, and I think we should be self-critical, and I think we should take that criticism on board and actually have a hard look at how we're, what kind of society are we building?
Thank you.
I think we need to look at the fact that we've got a new government now, and lots of people in the survey, they commended the police response, they commended the government response. So now what the government needs to do, they need to build on that response. And some of the comments that people had made to us was, thank goodness that the previous government was not in power while these riots were happening, because they could have completely mishandled the response. So I think we can build on that.
Thank you. Does anyone else have anything to add? No?
Just a very big thank you. Yeah.
Thank you. I'd like to just say thank you to all of the panel, and both Natalie and Alex also text me to say, although they had to leave early, they were really grateful for your contributions and for all of your information and answers today, and that brings proceedings to a close. Order. Thank you.